Hey everybody, welcome back. So we are going through the brain a little bit, just doing some basics. So this time we're going to talk about the surface. Oh gosh, sorry guys. There we go. There we go. Let's try that again. Surface and lobes of the brain. So we're just going to look a little bit at just the look-see of what it looks like. And so that means we're going to talk about the markings and the regions of the cerebral cortex, which developed from primarily the telencephalon. Is the telencephalon actually matured? Okay, so just like some first offs. The gyri and the sulci. So a gyrus is like the hilltop, right? And then a sulcus is like it's like the sunken ridge, right? And then there's even some that, like, some sulcus go really low, right? And so when they kind of really start doing that deep dive, we call those fissures. Okay, some more things to think about. White matter right here and gray matter. I'll just put that in. Gray matter matters, right? So gray matter is the gray part. It's nice. See how it's gray? And then the white matter is this here. It's like it's the light white color. And they call it the gray matter and the white matter because it's gray and it's white. So the gray matter is different because that's where the neurons are, right? This is like the neuron bed. This is where the intelligent rattle around thoughts happen, right? And then as far as the white matter, those are just like the tracks, right? The axons, eventually nerves will be pulled out of this. So that's the communication. This is the telephone lines, right? So like Dell says, update your gray matter because one day it may matter. Okay. So here's a cool brain that you want to see. And so it's really interesting because I love this one because it shows the vascularization on the brain. But then the neat thing is it also shows how easily peeled off that is. And so we'll talk later on about things like the cerebral spinal fluid and the blood-brain barrier and why that's important. Primarily because neurons are not supposed to die, right? They need to stay alive. They're like alive when you were born, and they'll actually probably die after you. So, you're going to want to keep them intact. And sometimes that immune system just gets a little chewy on stuff, hence a lot of autoimmune diseases. But anyway, so that's like another thing. So up here is also the lobes of the brain. So here's a fissure. We just talked about fissures, right? Green for fissures, right? So here's the longitudinal fissure. So anterior meaning up here. Here are your eyeballs, right? So this is you. Up here, here is your anterior, except they're, facing a totally different way. And here's a posterior, which is where your posterior is. Anyway, so longitudinal fissure, you'll see a few of these because they're, we'll go through them as we go. But if you remember when we were going through skeleton stuff and I told you, like, really double down on knowing your skeleton terms because they're going to come up over and over, right? And here they are again, right? Frontal bone, frontal lobe, right? Parietal bones, parietal lobe, right? So occipital bone, occipital, right? The occipital plate is down here, okay? So these are things to think about. So this divides us out into like the two hemispheres, and there's like all of this work, these theories on the hemispheres of the brain, and like, if we're on this side of the brain, we're going to be good at, like art, I guess, and then on this side of the brain, we'll be good at like math and, all of that. And there is some credence to that, but not entirely too much. They're interesting because you are bilaterally symmetrical, right? So meaning there's two is two, and then lateral, like sides, right? So here's one of the lateral, and here's the other. So it also means you have mirrored structure. So you'll have some frontal lobe over here. You'll have some frontal lobe over here. You'll have parietal lobe with motor sensory cortices over here, association areas, all that good stuff over here. You'll have occipital. It's going to have a lot of vision stuff. We really like to put that in the back of our head because, planning, we didn't plan that out super well, but we got it in there. That's what's important. So you'll have this as the left cerebral hemisphere, and this is your right cerebral hemisphere. And then, yeah, so this is it. Okay, let's look at some of the others. So, this is good. Okay, so here we go. Parietal, remember parietal, but remember here's temporal. Remember that one, right? So there's all these like wonderful spaces and divisions. So again, they're going to cover your skull plates for the most part. So let's just walk through them. So the temporal lobe, right? So it's going to be down in here. Think of it as where your ears are going to be. You're going to have some sensory, auditory processing information down here. Frontal lobe, right? We've invested quite a bit in the frontal lobe. So this is a lot of decision making. This is a lot of some of the sensory motor cortices are coming in here as association areas, also similar to what we have going on in parietal lobe. But look at that, this like entire like region is going to be really nice and active. Occipital lobe, strangely a vision center, right? So like, you know, your eyes are here. Here's your eyelashes. And your association area processing and everything else is going to be all the way in the back, right? It gets even weirder. Wait till you see what we did with the nerves. Anywho, here's another fissure. It's an important one because it's a fissure that divides the cerebellum from the cerebrum. So the cerebrum has a tremendous amount of conscious processing, right? So we know, and then the cerebellum, like no conscious stuff, right? For the most part. I also want you to bring attention to, and if I could, here, I'm going to try to make it a little bigger for just a sec. So you can see, look at all the sulci and gyri here. They're organized completely different. The structures are, I mean, it just looks so different, relatively speaking, right, to the cerebrum itself. That's because it has different jobs, right? Different levels of processing that it's going to undertake. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And then, oh, hey, brainstem, how you been, right? So here's the brainstem. We'll be coming down here. This will be the spinal cord itself. So, you know, pons, medulla oblongata, all the good stuff's in there. Okay, here is just like, I just wanted to show this, you know, we're talking about the skeleton. So here's like, you know, cranial bones, right? Here's this occipital, temporal, parietal, right? So hopefully that'll help a little bit. I mean, I know this has sphenoid and ethmoid, and we're not dealing with that as much, but there's frontal. Okay, hopefully that'll help you just remember positional information. So remember when we were talking a video or two ago about human brain development, we talked about like the telencephalon just went like crazy and got really big. Well, not only did it get really big, but it folds in on itself. So now we have like, this is the surface region. So like all of this stuff that we were looking here, this is just the surface, right? And in the inside is the insular region, right? Because it's inside, so it's in, sorry. Inside is insular. There it is. Okay, that's where I was going. Here we go. Okay, so it's the inside region of the brain. And so what you're looking here, this is like this gyri up here. And if you remember, we have like the sulci itself where it's sinking down. And so we're finding it in between the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. So here's, you know, like surgical implements helping us see that. And we'll look at some of the processing that happens on the inside. Generally, it's going to be a little bit more like basics, like emotions, regulation, stuff like that. A few other types of important processing. Some of my favorite processing, actually, it's just going to include sensory information. All right, so cerebral cortex. Think of it, they say, as the executive suite. In around the 1600s, we were realizing that this was the decision-making part of the brain. We refer to this as the seat of consciousness, awareness, sensory perception, meaning like we have sensory information, but now we're able to process and become aware of that, right? And that allows us to make decisions and make controls for voluntary motor initiation. And that's like not just your muscles, folks. Remember, that can be like squeezing some glands like your adrenals to get you up and run in an emergency situation. It also helps us processing things like communication and memory storage, as well as understanding, which makes brain trauma so particularly devastating, because remember, those neurons are there forever, and you can't have new neurons become replaced and dead and or damaged tissue and be able to remember your 5th grade birthday if that's what the ones that were there previously were in charge of. So, brain stuff's really fascinating, really important stuff. So for the most part, when we think about the gray matter, it's like not super thick. It's actually a little thin. It's like 2 to 4 millimeters, right? Like so teeny tiny. It's like your nail, your fingernail on your finger. It's somehow bulbous, and it's like that. It's like the tiny French tip of that nail. And so that's going to be, again, the gray matter where all of your neuron cell bodies are, right? So that's their dendrites. That's where they're talking to each other. Oh, those all important glial cells, which are going to be moving them to make connections, make new associations. Your blood vessels are going to be are proximal to this area as well. But what you don't see, remember, you don't really see axons unless they're on their way out, right? And it's 40% of the mass of your brain, right? Because of all those folds and whatnot. So even though it's thin, it's folded, so we get so much more real estate. Okay. So just like the last things, I want you to kind of think about what like the general considerations of the cerebral cortex. There are more, but this is the next set of videos that I kind of want you to get to. There are 4 general considerations of the cerebral cortex, but like really the next video really only is going to go through the next 3 types because I want to talk about the functional areas and I want to talk to you about the motor areas, the sensory areas, and this really cool part called the association area, right? So we get the sensory information that's coming in, right? Like, oh, that, I don't know, here's like a feather. That tickles, I guess. Oh, hee hee. Right? But you don't feel that part yet because you have to take that information in. And it's like going to be here, right? These like association areas of neurons or interneurons that are going to say, oh yeah, that's great. That's super funny. Let's like send some, motor nerve signals down to make us smile and to maybe, also maybe make that hee hee, like ha ha over here for fun. Just jazz it up, right? Oh, that doesn't look as happy as I was hoping. Here we go. Yay, ha ha, right? And so we're sensing, and then, so this is afferent, remember? Because we were affected by the tickly feather, right? So that's sensory. And then we're going to look at association, right? And so these are going to be things like your interneurons, right? So that's definitely some big time gray matter right there. And then they're going to make choices and decisions, and they're going to send outputs out down to your motor neurons, and those are the effective. Oh, sorry, spelling. You poor things and my spelling. Right, so this is an efferent, right, because it's going to have like cause and effect, right? This is going to be the effect. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in the next video, but for now, super happy you were able to join me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.